Good morning. I'm Jason Marzette, the director of the Atlantic Council's Adrian Arsh Latin America Center. Thank you for joining us for this timely and important conversation on how digital transformation can accelerate Latin America and the Caribbean's long-term regional prosperity. First, a special thank you to the Inter-American Development Bank for their partnership in making this important event happen, and also to the IDB's president, Mauricio Claver-Carone, for joining us today. As a reminder, this event will be conducted in English, but for those who are turning in via Zoom, we also have this option of simultaneous translation into Spanish at the bottom of your screen. Now, we are having this timely conversation since the COVID pandemic has highlighted the need for accelerated digitalization in Latin America and the Caribbean. Digital transformation holds tremendous promise for the region, but unlocking its benefits will require a coordinated public-private effort. This is why our discussion today will focus on how public-private partnerships can accelerate digitalization for an innovative and inclusive economic reactivation and long-term prosperity. And we'll look at the role of the private sector as well as possible public policy actions that can accelerate and strengthen digitalization. Now, this event is part of the Center's new series of high-level events and content titled Proactive LAC, which aims to help countries emerge stronger from the pandemic and leap forward in the developments. Only a few weeks ago, we brought together the public and private sectors to look at innovative approaches for helping micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises economically recover. I'm also delighted that this event will kick off a new partnership with the IDB on strengthening collaboration with and among business leaders in the region to support a robust economy in Latin America and the Caribbean. Now, with that, I'm pleased to welcome to the virtual Atlantic Council today's three speakers. First, Mauricio Claver-Carone was elected president of the IDB in September 2020. At the IDB, he has, among other things, prioritized development of a blueprint for post-pandemic recovery and efforts to avert another lost decade in the region with initiatives like Vision 2025, Reinvest in the Americas. And Mauricio will talk more about that during the panel. Kika Devalle is Mastercard's Executive Vice President for Market Development in Latin America and the Caribbean. Kiki and her team are responsible for expanding Mastercard's digital footprint in the region and also driving transformational efforts across digital payments in 45 countries and territories. And Luis Messler is Executive Vice President for Oracle Latin America, where he is responsible for increasing the company's leadership in Latin America and adapting swiftly to this period of rapid global digitalization. We'll focus the remainder of the hour on first setting the scene, then turning to opportunities for digital transformation and PPPs, and then we'll wrap by looking ahead. So with that, let's first start off by setting the scene. Now, widespread vaccination has been a key prerequisite to a return to normal or return to the new normal as part of recovery, but much more is needed to ensure that a recovery that could take regional development to the next level, in fact, moves forward. In other words, high vaccination rates, they set the floor for the region's recovery, while other factors may in fact set the ceiling. And how do we punch through that ceiling? So Mauricio, let me start with you. Now that the region has some of the highest vaccination rates globally, how has your assessment of Latin America and the Caribbean's regional outlook shifted over the past few months? And then also looking ahead, Mauricio, what are some of any new concerns and importantly, opportunities that might set the ceiling for this recovery?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jason. Really appreciate it. And thanks to Atlantic Council for bringing us together yet again on this important issue. And as it's been doing over the last year on all of these issues. Kiki from Mastercard, thank you. You guys are a great partner. Luis from Oracle, which is I'm super excited to announce is one of our newest partners. Looking forward to doing some great things with you. And I've just been speaking before with Pelaya from Coca-Cola, which we're also going to be doing some great things. I love your question, Jason, because the issue of vaccines is a great example of the dual reality that the region is living today. A year ago, and by the way, we talked about it here, Latin America and Caribbean was having the highest COVID-19 death rate per capita in the whole world. And today, the whole premise of your question is that nearly 65% of people have been vaccinated. And despite Omicron, we're now contributing just 14% of the new deaths worldwide, which is obviously down. And that's not good news. That's 14% too much. But A year ago, it was the end of the world. We were here talking like the region was way behind on vaccination, et cetera. And now it's a leader in vaccination. Oh, GDP growth was going to be anemic. It's, the end of the region, 3%. Well, we had 7% growth. And we were here saying, hey, we're going to be forecast breakers. But this is a huge leap forward. And that didn't happen on its own, though, right? That wasn't because of some like magic pixie dust. It took a lot of people acting together and challenging the status quo. And that shows how much change we can do and take place in a year when we have a strategic approach. However, I'm not going to just sit here, it's all good news. The region is the most unequal in the world in vaccinations, still huge differences between countries. There's 90% in Chile, but 20% in Jamaica, for example. And those are the kind of the two extremes in that regards. And then also between urban and rural areas. We need to break those divides. But hey, that's the story of the region with inequality, which is the biggest challenge we face, the socioeconomic challenge we face. But when I look across Latin America and the Caribbean today, I see two distinct realities and that exist, frankly, concurrently. One, the devastating pandemic losses that, as you know, if we don't address adequately, really could exacerbate the ongoing, the structural problems that have plagued the region, inequality, labor informality, which we all know about and we're all trying to deal with, to frankly, one of the world's worst workforce gender gaps. We need to fix that. But then I see a region that's ripe and has transformative potential for growth. It's buoyed by immense supply chain potential, which we talked about a lot as well, Jason. But digitalization, the innovative tech sector, the talented, ambitious younger generation that want to stay in the region to make a difference. And by the way, there's all kinds of exciting stuff there. There was a great Bloomberg article, which everybody wants to read this week, about how even people are hiring from here, there. I mean, it's an amazing opportunity. But here's another duality. Last year, and I talked about it not just with vaccines, our region beat the forecast, achieved 7% growth. And that was due to those global regional factors. And by the way, I'm very proud of this, including the fact that the IDB and IDB Invest, we had a record year of almost $24 billion in lending and private sector mobilizations. That's never happened in the history of this bank. But we're doing it, and we're doing it strategically. Now, some of the countries have recovered some of those losses, and some sectors are booming. We saw that Latin America had the fastest growth in the world for venture capital in 2021. Again, a huge opportunity. We had nearly $20 billion flowing into the region in venture capital for this huge tech talent boom. It's blowing past all records. FinTech, which is what we're going to discuss today, a huge part of it. It was the biggest recipient. 40% of the investment in FinTech. And guess what? Almost 40% of all FinTechs that are being created in the entire world today are in Latin America and the Caribbean. But for some of these countries and sectors, recovery might take some years. Job recovery hasn't kept pace with GDP gains. Obviously, for women and youth, those are what we have to take the opportunities, and then how do we close those gaps? Here's a good example. We worked with Mastercard, and I wasn't lying that I was talking you up, Kiki. We work with Mastercard. We've been analyzing the percentage of firms that did not make a transaction after April 2020, including business closures. And what we found was that small, medium-sized businesses, which are by far the largest source of employment, likely experienced higher permanent closures. And in some countries, between 15 and 35% of those firms haven't registered any transactions in April 2020. So we need to dig in and go in and help out those small, medium-sized enterprises. The rampant inequality continues to be a major issue that has political consequences. And we're seeing it. We're seeing, what we're seeing in the region politically has to deal with inequality. And even that the fact that there's been all this growth over decades hasn't caught up in regards to socioeconomic impact. So we need to help break those gaps. And so we need to make sure that we don't return to those pre-pandemic protests that can then further convulse the region. But how we do that is working together with governments to be able to breach those socioeconomic gaps. So Mauricio, okay, go ahead. I'm already. I talk too much, Jason. So you just cut me off whenever you want.
Yeah. So Mauricio, concerns. I'm hearing, reverting back to some of the longstanding historical problems the region has had: gender gap issues, inequality issues more broadly, rural-urban divide. But when you look at opportunities,
education. One more bad one, because I'm going to cut you on this one. Education. This is huge because almost over 150% more days of in-person learning has been lost in this region than in other parts of the world. That's another huge one there.
And that has real long-term implications. And looking at the opportunities, the technological talent, the boom in fintech and digitalization overall, and how do we use the opportunity of what was created to move forward the region in the last year and use that to move forward in other areas with regard to post-pandemic recovery. Thank you so much, Mauricio. I think you really kicked off a great question to Kiki and to Luis as well, too, right? Because as Kiki and Luis, as we look at the optimism, the cautious optimism that we have that the worst of the pandemic is behind us, as Mauricio was mentioning, the region faces many opportunities as well, many opportunities to take advantage of, focusing on short-term economic reactivation, but also what does that mean for long-term prosperity? This is frankly what drove the beginning of our launch in this Proactive LAC series. So as we think about the post-COVID future or living amid COVID future, but living in a way in which we're all able to return to a new normal, accelerated digitalization is likely a major legacy that the pandemic will leave with us. The future is now, as many will say. So from a private sector perspective, and maybe Kiki, will begin with you, what are the big opportunities that you're seeing from your vantage point at Mastercard?
Thank you, Jason, for the question, and thank you for the invitation. I mean, it's a pleasure. Mauricio did a great opening talking about the impact that digital transactions and digital economy has actually been of what we're seeing in Latin America. But let me kind of like paint the picture in terms of what we're seeing at Mastercard. Over the last 2 years, we've seen how digitization has transformed the way that people work, but also the way that people live their everyday lives. Every time we thought we had gotten comfortable with the new normal, we found ourselves having to reevaluate the next normal. And there's no going back. I mean, in our case, the accelerated digitization has impacted how consumers have shopped, consumers' appetite for digital payments, and even their banking habits. So early in the pandemic, and as a result of government disbursement programs, a Mastercard study showed that approximately 40 million people across Latin America became banked for the first time. We saw increased adoption and demand for digital solutions across a variety of different touch points. People relied less and less on cash and looked for flexibility and new ways to pay. And then retailers and issuers that adapted to this scenario were oftentimes the most successful during this COVID times. In the physical environment, to give you an example, consumers gravitated to technologies like contactless. Today, 1 out of 3 transactions in Latin America are via this form of tap and pay, due to the fact that most consumers are gravitating towards the safety and security that this represents for themselves, but then also for the businesses. This is a huge penetration compared to being practically non-existent just 3 years ago. So today, more than 33% of consumers are actually experiencing contactless. That's a great telling point of the power and impact of technology. What is also more telling is what we know from Mastercard is that Latin Americans are going to continue using this form to make their payments even after the pandemic is over. We also saw critical changes in banking. Many of our traditional customers had to adapt. They expedited their digital transformation plans. They invested in digital wallet technologies, on digital onboarding, on disbursement capabilities via prepaid products. So the mix of their portfolios changed. Their interests and investments also were driven towards their digital transformation aspects. But we also saw, and Mauricio alluded to this, a whole new wave of players that arrived, keen to co-create, keen to innovate on our network. Fintechs remain critical to creating solutions to make financial services more inclusive across the entire region. We saw record-breaking capital injected into this sector, as Mauricio mentioned, because of the opportunity that it represents, and it's yielded results. I mean, in fact, this past November, Mastercard announced that we surpassed 100 million digital cards issued in Latin America. This is the highest penetration out of any region in terms of digital accounts that we're seeing at Mastercard. It's a significant milestone for fintechs. Basically, our first fintech in LAC issued a card just 7 years ago. So the trajectory that this has actually driven has been incredible. It's approximately 1 out of 5 adults today are banked digitally across the entire region. So those are just some of the few touch points that I can tell you, Jason.
So Kiki, I'm hearing, if I heard you correctly, looking at any region around the world, Latin America has the highest growth in digital cards.
The highest growth and the highest penetration of digital accounts that we're seeing today. Yes.
That's impressive. It really bodes for how we think about what the future of the region looks like and how digitalization can help to provide for that inclusive future. Luis, let me shift to you from Oracle's perspective. What do you, from your perspective, how are you seeing accelerated digitalization transforming the region? And what are you seeing from Oracle insofar as the big opportunities of digitalization?
First of all, thank you very much to invite me for this event. I think, as I said, it's important for us. I think I can't start talking without mention my feelings about what happened with the losses and people, because we can project an optimistic picture, but we can't forget what happens. That so many people died and very close people. And that our feelings, I have to express my feelings about this, because we're going to talk about good stuff that we believe they're going to happen in the near future and already happening, but we need to express our feelings what happens up to now, right?
I couldn't agree more, Luis.
Yeah, that's for the beginning. And I think the pandemic, in terms of digital transformation, it accelerated everything. Everything we thought that would happen in 5 years or 10, it's already happening. I think Kiki just mentioned things that I didn't know it, but it's important and interesting how to connect this with our business. This really accelerates a lot. By far, I think Latin America has been the fastest growing region within our country, within our company. And I think we are growing 3 digits. By the way, we are hiring, despite of unemployment we have in Latin America. We are already hired more than 3,000 people last year. We're going to hire more 1,000 people this year, and in the process to hiring. We never grow. I've been in this position for more than 20 years, running Latin America, and I can tell you this was my best year in terms of growing, by far. We are very well prepared for that. I think Oracle really developed products for this situation. Means the vision we had in terms of the future, moving stuff to the cloud, was really connected to this moment we are going through. Means it's amazing how companies is moving very fast to the cloud. I can give some examples. I can give T-Mobile in Brazil. They move already more than 30-40% of their stuff to the cloud, and they're moving faster. Bimbo in Mexico, the same thing. They are standardizing all their processes in the cloud. And the good thing is about the cloud is the democratization, because we were talking about the SMB, because you used to tell that we have different solutions for the large enterprises and the small and medium-sized business. Now in the cloud, it's not exactly this way, because you can use the same solution you have for the large business for the small and medium-sized business, because you pay as used. Means not as in the past that you have to buy hardware, software, and hire a bunch of people to get all together. Now use the cloud is like plug and use, right? And that make much easier to connect the small and medium business. Our challenge is to build the ecosystem to get to the small and medium business side. But this is really available to small and medium business. By the way, I think at all, we are extremely optimistic to continue growth. We are growing almost 3 digits, and I hope we continue this the same way. I mean, it's extremely optimistic. We're hiring, we're growing, and I think it's very positive in terms of looking forward.
And it seems like Oracle's growth in the region is reflective of the many opportunities that exist, and as you mentioned, the fastest growing region, also the opportunity for cloud availability and small and medium sized businesses to be able to take advantage of that. Yeah. I want to shift and talk about what are the additional opportunities? What's still on the table? Opportunities for digital transformation and public-private partnerships in that regard. We've talked in this opening conversation about opportunities for economic reactivation and prosperity and the need to promote a new model of inclusive, sustainable development. But let's focus on how we can make this into a reality, especially in a reality taking into account the need for inclusivity as part of digitalization being a reality, and what that means for public-private partnerships as well. Kiki, let me shift back to you, and then I'm going to come to you afterwards, Luis, before going back to Mauricio. But Kiki, Mastercard has been a global leader in inclusive growth through digitization. We were speaking, or you were speaking earlier about the incredible growth in digital accounts. What are your key lessons from this experience insofar as the global growth in inclusive growth, and looking ahead, how can we make financial inclusion, especially with greater digitalization of financial inclusion, how can we make financial inclusion a possibility for all, or at least the norm and not the exception in Latin America and the Caribbean moving forward?
Yeah. Financial inclusion is our key priority for Mastercard. I mean, financial inclusion is ultimately about empowerment. It's helping people to envision the life that they want. It's knowing that this life is possible, and then it's making sure that they have the financial tools needed to obviously achieve this. I mean, this is a very challenging time. COVID has certainly pushed many consumers and businesses back into poverty. And for many, getting access to finance is a starting point to building that better life. So we view financial inclusion as a critical stepping stone for us to drive economic prosperity across the entire region. It's not enough to actually worry about getting people access. It's using payments, it's driving savings, it's creating credit products, insurance that are key to unlocking the doors to rebuilding and planning for that future. So financial inclusion needs to be thought about in a much broader way than just thinking about getting somebody a prepaid card. One key lesson that we've learned in our work with financial inclusion, and I spoke earlier a little bit about the power of technology, we've also observed the vital role that partnerships have in advancing socioeconomic development, in connecting people to the services that they need, in building new opportunities and the tools to actually have that better future. So our journey began years ago, I think more than a decade ago, and we have already included 500 million people into the financial system. Our goal by 2025 is to expand that global commitment to bring a total of 1 billion people into the financial system. There's still many that remain unbanked, underserved in this economies, and particularly in Latin America, that is the reality that we're facing. We also have a direct focus on women. Mauricio mentioned before the disproportionate amount of workplace displacement for women, and they have been disproportionately disadvantaged because of the pandemic. So when I think about that specific use case, a key component of growing financial inclusion in Latin America has to be thinking about inclusion in an inclusive manner, or in a growing digital inclusion, but then also growing or driving social inclusion. So in this context, digital inclusion means having access to affordable and robust internet. It means being able to drive internet-enabled devices, having digital literacy training, bringing new tools to the SME so that they actually become well-equipped in this new environment. All of these things have to be done. So every time we pull out a smartphone or a card to pay for something, we need to be reminded or think about everybody that is actually not able to actually do that. So on how we make this a reality, we talked a little bit about the power of collaboration and the power of partnerships. Whether they are in the private to private sector or the public to private partnership, our efforts in financial inclusion need to obviously include this comprehensive approach. So when we think about a traditional Mastercard customer, it no longer means banks. It actually means the work that we actually have to do with governments. It means the work that we're doing with fintechs, with even digital wallets in terms of driving embedded finance into their own applications. So 2020 offered a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us to drive digital payments for citizens, for businesses, for consumers. But now it is time for the banks, for the fintechs, for the national governments to embrace not just the digital technology, but to actually think about what are the real use cases and the services that we need to drive to invest in the financially excluded so that we obviously build towards that future, which is inclusive of building for education and building for trust. So the role needs to be working with the large and well-known financial institutions from the ground up, right? Building those digital or helping them in the digital transformation. It needs to include working with fintechs, with wallets, who are critical players in the payout, as an example, and in driving that engagement, that usability in the digital environment, but also working with the government to support policy, to facilitate competition, to modernize their own systems for collections, for disbursements. All of these things need to actually be in the agenda for us all to be successful in Latin America.
Okay, those are excellent points, and really speak to the need for public-private partnerships and making all this happen, because it's really that partnership that's going to take some of these ideas to fruition. One of the ideas we were speaking about a few weeks ago with Coca-Cola is also small and medium-sized enterprises, and the need for financial, how to accelerate the financial inclusion of those enterprises, given the importance that SMEs play for job creation and job growth across the region. And I think exactly to your point as well, the importance of bringing women greater into the space as leaders and both in SMEs and oftentimes as leaders in their own households as well. I want to shift, Luis, talk about we talk about digital transformation, and concerns arise that digitalization benefits only the certain sectors of the population. It benefits only the most skilled. It benefits only the most privileged members of our society. And frankly, for the regional prosperity moving forward, that has to be the exception and not the norm. We know that Oracle believes in digital transformation as a force that can empower all people. So can you elaborate, Luis, on this vision, and how can digital transformation be the tide that lifts all boats?
Yeah. Great, thank you, Jason. I think we put in place like our purpose like a few years ago, which is transform the world, empowering people through innovation. And going into this direction, we try to understand which kind of profile we need to look for to starting hiring in the company. And we normally, most of the companies look for hiring like the best students from the best university. And we find out that this was the best professional for the future. And we develop a process that is extremely inclusion that we call GenO, is the next generation from Oracle, which we started with interviews, at the blind interview for the started, like last time we hired like 300 people. And how we do it, like we start with blind interview with like 5,000 people. We don't know the gender, we don't know the university, we don't know from where the people coming. And guess what? Most of people come from not a privileged world. Most of people have very, very strong soft skills in terms of humility, gratitude, generosity, and probably those are the skills that we're looking for. And more than the best university and the best students. And at the end, I think we find out like having people, most of people, the last one, we have 80% of the people we hired was 80% women and Black, which was surprising and nothing that we direct into this field, but at the end, this was the result. And we're very happy about that. And this kind of process is already becoming a standard. We roll out this to Europe already. That is really working quite well. And this is one process. We have another one is connected to education. And we define that we need to have more connected to this what we describe this gap we have in terms of privileged people in our region. And we study program one, which we developed with a startup, a way of certify and educate people to programming and entrepreneurship. And every single contract we sign in the contract with the company, we certify and educate people in Java and entrepreneurship. And the target for this year is educate 40,000 people. We already have subscribed 13,000 up to now. And the year end in Oracle is in May. That's we're going to get to more than 40,000 people that we're going to certify and educate for the region. And most of them are totally inclusive. Means it's women, Black, and all in coming for not privileged classes, right? And I think that's what we've been doing.
That's excellent, Luis. Thank you. And really important points on education and the different components of that. Education having to both be programming education insofar as jobs of the future, but also entrepreneurship. And the two are so interconnected. Now, Mauricio, we've been listening to Kiki and Luis talk about Mastercard's vision from Kiki and looking at financial inclusion and how to think about that moving forward, and the role that the public sector could play with the private sector, and Luis's vision on education and inclusion as part of Oracle's work. So, Mauricio, I'd love to get your thoughts reflecting on their comments, and also the fact, Mauricio, that you're a staunch advocate for, of course, private sector-led growth in the region, and through things like Vision 2025, the Private Sector Partners Coalition that launched, I think, just about a year ago, and that's really focusing on partnerships with the private sector is fundamental for economic recovery in the region as part of the pandemic. So love to get your thoughts, Mauricio, both on some of the vision that Kiki and Luis laid out, but then also your thoughts on how the region overall can also leverage partnerships with companies like Oracle and Mastercard and others to better assist in economic recovery and prosperity.
Yeah, that's a great question, Jason. Let me say on what Kiki and Luis mentioned, which is really important, and they're practitioners on the ground, and you're hearing it, is one, the opportunity. Look, you're a Latin Americanist. You've heard about informality forever. Biggest challenge in the region, informality. This is the one time we're going to have in our generation to take rhetoric and to turn it into practice to breaking that informality gap. Financial inclusion is the first step to doing so. Digitalization is how we're going to break the barriers of informality. And you're seeing the huge progress. You have to be all in regards to digitalization. Digital transformations are going on in the region. That's why the IDB itself began in digital transformation of the bank. And we're helping governments digitally transform themselves so they can serve their citizens better. This is it. This is how we're finally going to break informality in the region for the first time, instead of talking about it ad nauseum. But here's a challenge, right? And by the way, on gender, Kiki also mentioned gender. This is it. Look, SMEs, the most successful small, medium-sized entrepreneurs in the region are women. Data shows they have 10% more revenues than men, but they have 50% less access to financing. That's nonsensical. We have to break that. If women are incorporated into the labor force in Latin America and the Caribbean at OECD levels, that's 10 to 20% GDP growth in the region just from that. What else has that kind of impact? I mean, so these are no-brainers, and we have to incorporate it. But now here, we're talking about fintech. We're talking about the 20 billion VC cap that's going in, and we're talking about all this. Is super exciting. But here's the challenge, and I'm going to say something controversial, but then it wouldn't be me if I did it. Governments can't screw it up, and I think that's the biggest. And I'm not going to call out these companies, but companies, I hear it all the time. Part of the reason that we're seeing this boom is because it's the greatest talent in the region. When I ran for president of the IDB and Kiki and Luis are in Miami, I said, I've seen people from our 26 borrowing nations arrive in Miami and suddenly become successful. And that's not because you become more successful in Miami because all of a sudden you're more talented in Miami. No, the talent was there. You're able to have the talent in the region. The question is, in Miami, you just had the opportunity. You just had like a blackboard that you were able to go off and then put your innovation to work. That talent is in the region, and we're seeing it. But now finally, because of these new technologies, these new waves, people are figuring out how to do it, and government really hasn't encroached on it too much yet. So it's letting people have kind of freedom of innovation. So governments have a choice. They either ride this wave of growth and innovation, or they watch it crash with it. That's a fact. So what our job is to try not to do that. And by the way, that's why we did Vision 2025. You mentioned it. And we had our 5 central pillars for our lending, mobilizations, value chains, nearshoring, which we've talked a lot about, small, medium-sized enterprises, climate, obviously important, gender and diversity, and digitalization. And when I talk about lending and mobilizations, that's our roadmap, because private sector-led recovery is going to be the key in that regard. And the reasons that growth exceeded expectations last year is precisely because the governments had to make hard choices to take counter-cyclical measures to really mitigate the blow of the pandemic. But at the same time, and this is going to be the challenge that we're seeing, there's been historic pressure that's been put on budgets. And we're seeing that countries are having these ballooning debts, narrow fiscal space for the critical reforms that they need. So the private sector is going to be key because the governments can't afford it. And if they do, they're going to blow up. And that's what we don't want, right? So it's clear that we have to ground to make up, and we're going to do so in this regards. But that's where the resources, job creating power, and knowledge of the private sector is going to take place. That's why we created the Private Sector Partners Coalition, the largest, most ambitious effort that we've done in this bank's history. We started a year ago with 40 of the world's largest firms. We're now at over 160. The level of interest has been tremendous, and that's why we have it. And today, we're super excited to announce our new partnership with Oracle, which we're going to be signing a memorandum of understanding soon, and we're going to be doing great things like we've already been doing with Mastercard. But let me give you just a few examples so I can go to the last part of your question, and then I'm going to shut up, Jason, because I know I talked about
that's great. Please go for it.
Let me just give you a couple of let me give you a few examples in regards to how we're going. So, with Mastercard, we work together with Mastercard on policy dialogues with financial regulators to really, I talk about not screwing it up, to improve the open finance ecosystem in the region. That's going to be key. We're discussing opportunities to foster financial inclusion, digitalization, the credit union segment. That's super important. With Luis, with Oracle, look, this could be a new partner. We want to work with partners with Oracle and we're obviously with Mastercard because they have this robust model also of corporate citizenship. Their strength, the prominent players in this regard. They have the shared belief that technology is going to empower people, and that's going to be key because then you're going to get the buy-in from civil society. So we're preparing this partnership, and we're going to talk about education, health, social innovation, reskilling. That's going to be important. But let me add just one last crucial point. This is powerful work, but it doesn't have to exist in a bubble, and it can't exist in a bubble. The governments must undertake the critical reforms to enable private sector-led growth, to build a better business ecosystem, to enable investments and partnerships of these. Those that do so in regards to an advanced pro-transparency measures, simplification of procedures, infrastructure modernization, export promotion, and so much more, those that do so are going to be the success stories of the region, are going to attract all the capitals, are going to attract the inflows. Those that don't are going to be the negatives, are going to be the outflows. So we have to do so. We have new impetus, and I'm super excited to partner up with Oracle, with Mastercard, with Coca-Cola, and with all our 160 plus members to really specifically hone in on these challenges and opportunities, more importantly.
Thank you, Mauricio. Let me shift back to Kiki and Luis for your kind of day-to-day on the ground perspective on is both leaders in the technology space. The region could greatly benefit from your work, your expertise, your competencies of works as it seeks to work on further accelerating digital transformation. What's your perspective? How can the public sector empower firms like yours? Mauricio was just speaking about the need for governments to undertake critical reforms and to be receptive and to put forward the policies that really encourage further digitalization, further opportunities for fintech, and does so in an inclusive, sustainable way. What's your perspective on how the public sector can empower firms? And I'll start with you, Kiki, like Mastercard and maybe others in your space as agents of change in digital transformation. How can partnering with the public sector help? And what does Mastercard see as the opportunities that could be further unlocked with greater partnership with the public sector?
Yeah. So public to private partnerships are essential. I mean, they're essential in supporting policy decision making. They're also essential in modernizing for the benefit of the citizens of any given country, right? There is no better or more important time, as Mauricio was alluding to, for governments to remove obstacles to competitiveness, stepping up the infrastructure investments in areas like connectivity and access to capital, and then also to promote adoption of digital technologies. So when you think about the governments, they need to ideally ideate on the innovative strategies that leverage pioneering efforts by the private sector to really try to bring their own systems up to par in areas like electronic payments, in areas like data analytics and identity management. I mean, those are all areas that the public sector needs to make sure that they're thinking about how to modernize their own systems. Now, over the course of the pandemic, governments reacted in a variety of different ways. I mean, some facilitate social disbursements to their citizens, leveraging all players in the chain. Others, not so much. However, during this response, there were clear differences in the abilities of government to push out transfers at speed and in a targeted way for the intended purpose. That's just one of the ways in which governments need to think about how to actually drive further efficiencies for their building their own public sector solutions with the help of players like Mastercard that can deliver secure social benefit disbursements to better serve their citizens. That's just one example. But, today I talked a little bit before about boosting the economic opportunities for women to secure an inclusive economy. They're according to the International Labor Organization, the pandemic cost about 34 million jobs in Latin America, with women being the greater loss category when compared to men. And when women are sidelined due to the expanded demands and the job losses, the volatility of the economies are put at risk. So in order to work towards this inclusive economy, we as Mastercard are, for example, working right now with the Minister of Women and Gender Equality in Chile, as well as with the UN Women, partnering with Microsoft to actually deliver a virtual platform that is called Todas Conectadas. The platform is for women entrepreneurs to strengthen their digital presence. It has digital tools for businesses to obviously increase their productivity to also help drive financial inclusion. The efforts are expanding. They're expanding quickly, I'm happy to say, with other governments like Mexico, like Paraguay, Costa Rica, Colombia, and Uruguay. So these are efforts that through the Minister of Women and Gender Equality, we've been able to actually help drive efforts that are not just impacting one market in LAC, but are actually moving across as a cross-regional initiative. So it's a great example. We have also been building a Mastercard Digital Allies program. It's a coalition with the private sector to accelerate the digitization of small businesses and offer some tangible benefits, incentives, if you will, for businesses to be able to increase their productivity and improve their financial health. So those are just two examples of ways in which we actually work with the public sector, with our own private sector partners to make sure that through a network effect, we can drive better impact to the SME community.
Kiki, those are excellent examples. I remember we hosted you last year with the Minister of Women of Chile to have an opportunity to talk about some of this work, and that's a real tangible. I love that because it's a real tangible example of the way in which a company like Mastercard can partner with both national governments, but then also with UN Women to really drive change. With empowering women and women as critical business leaders, and also, as you mentioned, women who have suffered more than men insofar as job loss as part of the pandemic. So thank you for that, Luis. Let me shift to you from Oracle's perspective. How do you see public sector empowering some of the movement to the cloud, other priorities of Oracle, insofar as we look at opportunities for digital transformation, and what have you seen from Oracle's perspective insofar as the opportunities and maybe some of the challenges of partnering with the public sector? How can partnering with the public sector help in digital transformation?
Yes, thank you, Jason. I think, first of all, let me start with the first industry that we're being investing a lot. And you hear that we just bought Cerner, a very important company dominating the healthcare. I think the healthcare, starting with that, I think it's a huge opportunity for government to deal with. I think we suffered what we suffered during this pandemic. We know what represents, how important it is. And the health, I think, we used to say that only health, the rest we can go after, right? We can find. And the revolution experiment in healthcare is going to be huge. Means the preventive way to deal with illness and all kinds of diagnostic. We can do it through new tools in terms of technology. And we are strongly investing in healthcare. And I think the government rule in terms of ruling out new technology in healthcare, I think it's something very, very important as well. And the other arena is education. Means the basis for development is education. You see the number of the unemployment in the region is huge. And the only way to turn around this situation is through education. And the rules and how the government we're going to act in terms of preparing this new generation and educating them for the new technology coming through, I think it's another very important rule in the government. And the third one is transportation. I think people normally take more time being moved from their house to their jobs than the time they work. And this is another important arena that I think the government should really look forward and do important investment. I think the three main focus, I think government can have a very, very important rules in terms of helping people in the country development.
Thank you, Luis. As you mentioned, fundamental education, fundamental the role of government working with private sector to facilitate the education in some of in these spaces in which companies like Oracle and others in the technology space have so much, of course, expertise in. Mauricio, let me shift back to you. So we've been talking at length that we all agree on digitalization as being critical to jumpstarting growth and also preparing the region to be even more competitive frankly, globally, as we look at the post-pandemic recovery. We've been hearing again from Kiki and Luis on their perspective on how their companies can partner with the public sector. We talked earlier, Mauricio, about Vision 2025, the private sector coalition that was the IDB started a year ago. But I'd like to have this opportunity for you to share a little bit more on what the IDB is doing to accelerate digital transformation in the region, and also some of the priorities of the IDB to ensure that countries across Latin America and the Caribbean can really reap the benefits of digitalization. What are you seeing as the key efforts to move forward in the short term that you're focusing on at the IDB, and then also medium long term?
Yeah. So let me, I think, land the plane on what we're all saying here. So as we get the point, digitalization is not only going to be key to jumpstarting growth, as we've all talked about, but it's also going to be the fastest, most effective, and the most inclusive way to do so. And that's the key. That's the underlying message here. Closing the connectivity gap in the region, with obviously with more advanced economy levels, that's going to require huge investment. But what we've done, and we just did our broadband development index report, doing so would generate an 8% increase in GDP, over a 6% increase in productivity, and more than 15 million direct jobs. So that's huge, right? So that's what we have to focus on. That's what we need to do. Obviously, e-government. We've seen this year, many governments, and we did another study, therefore, whereby we saw the digitalized services in the region increase from 20% to over 40%. So that's the data. That's where we are. So now we have to move at 5G speed, right? Let's say, and that's my bad joke for the day. So don't take me for my bad joke in that regard. So let's say we're moving this at 5G speed. So what are we doing? In 2021, we approved over almost $1.5 billion in operations to boost digitalization in the region. That included more support for telehealth, hybrid education network. So now, what does that mean? What does invest in digitalization mean? That gets to your question. Digital infrastructure, hardware, software, prerequisite, obviously. Amid the lockdowns, we worked with NTT Data, Microsoft, obviously our coalition partners. We launched DigiGov project, and that helped Honduras, Guatemala, Jamaica. That helped them ensure the continuity of public services to lay the groundwork for digital delivery. Another side of investing in digitalization is capacity building, skills training. Obviously, for individuals, companies alike, we heard Luis talk about it. We funded boot camps, digital training programs for women, youth, low-income groups. We included also an IT certification program that we did with Google in Brazil and Panama. We have what we call our digital checkup, which is a tool that allows small, medium businesses to self-diagnose what their level of digital maturity and provides recommendations for next steps. By the end of last year, we already had implemented that in 12 countries, 13,000 businesses, critical for financial inclusion. IDB Invest, our private sector arm, we're supporting digitalization of all these small businesses. And also, let me take the opportunity to say that we mobilized almost $3 billion from IDB Invest last year in this regard, more than any year in the 62-year history of this bank. Another, regulatory normative frameworks. That's going to be key. An example is our FairLAC initiative. That's the region's first public-private alliance to promote the ethical use of artificial intelligence in the public sector. Huge. By the way, we also have LACchain to see which we created as well, the first of its kind to help with the new movements in blockchain. And I'll leave you with what comes to obviously IDB Lab, which is what our Innovation for Inclusion Laboratory, I'm very proud of it. It's the only international financial institution that we even have this IDB Lab. Their Integra initiative, we crowdsource solutions to help mom and pop shops throughout the region to begin to digitalize and begin e-commerce. And that receives supports from some of the leading food and beverage companies, many of whom as well are members of our coalition. This is just, a breach of it, but we got to do a lot more. And the more partners we have, and we're looking forward to have new partners and do a lot more.
Mauricio, let me just ask you a quick follow-up question there. As you're thinking about, you ended by saying we got to do a lot more. Yeah. What more do you want to do? What do you think should be prioritized to be on the table insofar as looking to what needs to be accomplished in the year or two ahead?
Yeah. Hey, look, we need to jumpstart growth. That's clear, right? And so what we're seeing here is these opportunities, and that's going to gain, from the key structural reforms for a more strategic way of working. So what we need to do is put steroids on the strategic platform we're creating here. What we did last year worked, right? We started seeing it, but now we need to make it stick, right? We need to have the enabling environment for that long-term growth, which is what we're looking for. And for these not to be one-offs, right? Here's my biggest concern. I said, hey, we broke all forecasts. My big shtick now, and I love saying is I want to move the IDB from being like a forecaster to a forecast breaker, right? So we went from the region is behind everyone on vaccines, and guess what? We're now leaders. The region is lagging on GDP growth. It's only going to be 3%. Hey, guess what? We had 7%. The same thing they're saying this year. 3% growth. And there's every acronym in the world does forecast. And we do forecast better than anyone, and I love our team, and they're the best, and I always get crap for it. But we got to break forecasts, right? I want my goal. I succeed. We succeed as an institution. The region succeeds when the forecasts are wrong. And that's our goal. Now, what we need to make sure, and this is where the key part and goes to your question, is to make sure that it's not short-term, that 7% isn't just because commodity prices went up and we repeat the mistakes of the past, whereby you see over the last 10 years, commodity prices went up, oil, copper, nickel, you name it, soy, and then all of a sudden it gets absorbed and sucked into, populist programs by governments in the region. So frankly, in that regards, the politicians have to get out of the way, right? We have a huge opportunity. We have a huge opportunity to really transform the region through digitalization, through these efforts. And again, either ride the wave or watch it crash and crash with it. And that's what's going to be the most important things. And I think that's going to have the longest term impact on sustainable development. That's the key of Vision 2025. And look, we're going to do it with our partners. And if not, we're all going to crash.
I think riding the wave is key, and having that be a sustainable wave as well, right? Kiki, we have about 10 minutes left. And I want to shift to just looking ahead in these last 10 minutes. And Luis, begin with you this time. As Oracle is a multinational company, operates throughout the region. Obviously, it operates globally as well. It's a great opportunity to contribute even more to regional recovery and prosperity. What do you see, Luis, as some of the key opportunities for Oracle in terms of supporting recovery? You've talked a lot about that. You talked about education. You've talked about other issues throughout this conversation. But this is a final question for you on other opportunities that you see for Oracle and other firms in the technology space to support recovery.
Yeah. First of all, I want to echoing Mauricio optimism, because it's really contagious. It's amazing because how you just described. I think it's the same way I feel. I think the opportunity in the region is really huge. We've been investing a lot, Jason. I think we already have in place as 4 data centers. We're planning to have extra 6 data centers. We have 2 in Brazil. We have 1 in Chile. We're going to have another one, the second one in Chile, 2 in Mexico, 2 in Colombia. Then we keep investing strongly. Means this is the first thing. We're investing hard. We put in place a development center in Guadalajara, Mexico, that we already hired 2,000 people, and probably going to get to chances to get to 10,000 people hiring in Mexico. And they keep investing in this education, certification, and people in the field and inclusion. I think this is a key component of our strategy, and because I think it's the only way to survive, because without diversity, you can't survive in this new world. And I think it's the kind of thing that we're doing very strongly. And at least we hired, as I said in the beginning, we hired 3,000 people last year. We're going to hire another 1,000 people. We're going to keep this path. And by transforming our company, our customers, and the customer of our customer, we think we really contributed to the economy very strongly. And I think that's the way we think that this is going to be our part in this equation. That I think it's extremely optimistic. The same way I think Mauricio and Kiki describing. We are here to build a new and better world for the region. And I strongly believe that we can become an example. I think going in the other direction, I do believe also we are as entrepreneur. I think we used to live in countries that with all the right, left, and revolutions and all this kind of government, and you survive. And at the end, we build a very strong entrepreneurship mindset. And I think with the entrepreneurship mindset, we have Latin America is a big differentiator comparing to the rest of the world. And I think we're used to all this crisis and all this kind of thing and manage budget and despite of the environment we live, right? And I echo Mauricio and Kiki voice that we're extremely optimistic about the future.
Thank you, Luis. Entrepreneurship, and I think that the resilience of entrepreneurship as well across the region, and I share your optimism, and I also share your initial comments too, that we also have to be realistic about the many people who have suffered tremendously, the lives lost, and others throughout the pandemic. But we have to look to the future and see what kind of opportunities can be created. Kiki, you've talked when we look at opportunities that you see for Mastercard, other firms in your space. You've talked about specific examples we mentioned before with partnerships with Ministry of Women for creating digital platforms. We've talked during this conversation about financial literacy, financial inclusion. What are other key opportunities that you see looking ahead into the future for Mastercard and other firms to support recovery?
Yeah. So in this question, I mean, I think it's important to note that we believe that the role that we can play is in lending our technology, is in lending our assets, our data insights, and our expertise for the betterment of society. I mean, the role that we're playing in driving economic prosperity is not just a good business opportunity; it's part of our responsibility. And I think I share that with Oracle in this call. This can only be accomplished by partnering with all the stakeholders in the ecosystem. That's why we push for the private to private partnerships as well as the public to private partnerships, right? There isn't a one size fits all silver bullet that is going to be able to drive the economic prosperity that we're all aspiring to in Latin America. I think the good news is that there's an interest and there is an intent to work with the governments in their modernization plans. I'll give you another example, Jason, but we're partnering with governments today through our digital country partnerships. This is a tailored approach, a tailored framework to support countries with their digital transformation ambitions. It is basically allowing Mastercard to work alongside the governments to deliver tangible benefits that improve the quality of life for the citizens. Right now, we have signed agreements with Mexico, with the government of Panama, and also with Guatemala to digitize the infrastructure and the economy with an aim to accelerate inclusive growth. This agreement basically includes how we digitize disbursements, how we digitize collections for their citizens, including around areas like transit, like public transit. It includes addressing tourism, using data insights so that they understand, the government understands where to potentially make their investments, where to actually, where are tourists actually coming from. It includes providing access to affordable tools for the small business sector. It also includes, for example, advising on their central bank digital currency strategies. So as we look into the future, how do they actually need to be better prepared for those new technologies? So all of this combined is in essence what we have actually built through our digital country partnerships. We have actually seen tremendous interest and moves from governments like the three that I actually mentioned. But we're also working with other governments in support of Latin America, in support of Central America in this case, for example. We have a partnership under the leadership of the VP Kamala Harris in the US. We're a founding member of the Partnership for Central America. We have our executive chairman at Mastercard, Ajay Banga, and former CEO, is the chairman of the partnership. And our interest is in actually bringing 5 million people in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras into the formal economy and to digitize 1 million micro and small business. So we have committed to investing, for example, 100 million in the Northern Triangle countries. It's an investment that is aimed to drive this transformational financial inclusion efforts. It's working with the government, working with the financial industry, and working with players like fintechs to increase transparency and support economic development. So the work that we do is as much as it is with the governments as it is with the private sector. And partners like Walmart or Accion are actually partnering with also in the Northern Triangle efforts that we're working on.
Thank you, Kiki. Really important the work of Mastercard with the partnership for Central America and helping that Northern Central America sustainable, inclusive growth for a number of reasons, including the need for sustained foreign investment, and that's great to see hear that leadership there. I want to, Mauricio, we have just a couple minutes left. I want to end with you. We were talking earlier, Mauricio, about riding that wave. So as we look at riding that wave, we need to think about that wave being sustainable growth, and how do we ensure that all these efforts are sustained in the long term. From your perspective, from the IDB multilateral space, what are some key policy actions that you think have to be implemented in the short and long term to accelerate sustainable development in the region moving forward?
Look, let me say something that's we just did a groundbreaking report on trust and confidence. And what we found is that in this region, Latin America and the Caribbean, is the region of the world where there's less trust and confidence in its governments and even amongst each other. And that changes everything in that regards. Informality stems from the fact that in Latin America and the Caribbean has the most entrepreneurial, most talented people in the entire world, but yet they don't trust their governments, let alone each other. So therefore, you have this ill in this regards. We now have the chance to flip that on its head. And the pandemic, for all of its horrors and at way too high of a cost, is giving us this opportunity to take this fresh look at the old dogged challenges and giving us a chance to reassess, to reset, to reinvest strategically, to take advantage of these new powerful openings for a more prosperous region in this regards. And digitalization is at the center of it. And we need to break that mold. And that's the message we send every day to our borrowing member countries. That's what the 21st century IDB aims to realize. And what we've looked at is the highest priorities, the power to yield both short-term success for recovery, to lay the groundwork for that sustainable development, is the fact that we need to help governments improve efficiency, effectiveness of taxation, of spending, shorter term boost, as well as more space for social funding, other requirements. And here's the best news. And I'm not going to bore you with like all policy stuff, but let me just tell you this. Today, whether you're a government of the left, center right, or the right, you all agree that foreign investment is good. You all agree that job creation is good. And if you don't deal, and you have to deal with financial realities, right? You don't have, well, anyway, the world's changed. You have to deal with financial realities and you got to figure it out for yourself. Now, in how you do that is going to be key. If you don't want to go back to the protests because of the socioeconomic gaps, et cetera, inclusion, socioeconomic gaps are key, and closing that is key. And that is the focus of every single thing we're doing here at the IDB, because at the end of the day, Mastercard, Oracle, Coca-Cola, all those companies are going to be successful in job creation and things of the sort. And then what we can do best as a multilateral development bank is focusing on then how we can help them with governments, civil society, et cetera, reach those and narrow those socioeconomic gaps. And the incentive is for the politicians to do so, because if not, they're going to go to a return of those protests that plagued the region over the last few years, because that's what was at the heart of it. Inequality. We need to break that. And I think we have a great opportunity to do so.
Mauricio, that's a fantastic note to end on. I want to also end by thanking you, thanking the IDB for the partnership and launching this new effort together. Thank you, Kiki Debaye from Mastercard, as well as Luis Messler from Oracle for joining us, for your insight, your analysis, and also for giving us and the many participants watching today new ideas on how they can work to accelerate this digital transformation and do so in an inclusive, sustainable way that involves public-private cooperation. I also want to end by thanking Pepe Zhang and Ada Lardizabala, my team, who put this incredible event together. And I invite everybody to stay tuned to continued episodes of the Proactive LAC series as we work from the Adrian Arsh Latin America Center to find inclusive, sustainable ways to help the region accelerate in its post-pandemic economic recovery. So with that, thank you all for joining us again today, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you so much.